So, William Henry Harrison dies, and suddenly now you have this guy who is the President of the United States of America, and his name is John Tyler. He was never intended to be president. The Whigs put him there just to somehow get Southern Democrats to vote for the Whig Party. It's successful, but now you have a guy who is a former Democrat. You have a guy who is repeatedly going to veto things that the Whigs want. He's going to veto a bank bill. He's going to veto a tariff bill. And basically what's going to happen is he's very quickly going to anger the Whig leadership. So this is a major problem. Now, John Tyler has some goals. And one of his goals is he wants to be, at some point, he wants to get elected once again in the election of 1844. His goal is to get reelected as president. The problem is nobody likes him. The Democrats don't like him. The Whigs don't like him. So he needs to build a national following. So he decides he's going to bring up the issue that everybody had been avoiding for a while, and that's the issue of,
are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me
pop my collar?
tonight? Are you sorry we drifted apart?
And so what's going to happen is he's going to try to make the issue of Texas kind of the issue that's going to build him a national following. And what he wants to do is he wants to annex Texas. That's the goal. Now, what happens next is not good for John Tyler because basically a treaty is submitted to the Senate in 1844, a treaty which would have annexed Texas, made it a part of the United States of America, and guess what happens, boys and girls? Good guess. Guess again. We're doing yoga again.
John Tyler vetoes it.
No, he wants Texas.
Yeah,
Congress says
No! No! Don't shut me up!
no. And the bill is defeated. So when the election of 1844 comes up, Mr. John Tyler is not exactly the candidate that the Whigs want. He's not the candidate the Democrats want. So goodbye to Mr. John Tyler. Who can we have run for the election of 1844? Who in American history would serve as a great candidate for the American people to decide upon? The Whig Party is going to pick a guy you've probably never heard of.
George
Henry Mother effing Clay. F for fantastic. So Clay's going to run as the Whig candidate, and remember the Whig Party's all about an active federal government, tariffs, banks, kind of like that old American system idea. He's running as the presidential candidate for the Whig Party. Whigs going at it again. He's going to, he don't quit. Now the Democrats, on the other hand, need to find a guy, and Martin Van Buren looks like he's going to be the guy. Wolverine's dad is going to make a comeback. But there's some problems for Martin Van Buren. One, he looks like a guy who really should be like a troll underneath the bridge stealing children as they cross it. He's not exactly, that great looking, but that's not really a problem. That's just more me speaking out loud. The problem is, what is he most known for as president? The Panic, Martin Van Buren. Doesn't have a good rep. So the Democrats don't really want him. And what happens next is a guy who was considered a dark horse candidate.
James K. Polk.
James K. Polk, a guy who, up until this point, was really unknown in most parts of the country. There's even a song about him. This one's way better than the Tippecanoe song. For Tippecanoe and Tyler too. You know that one? Slavi likes it, you know, Bulgarians. Try and trip me again. Natalia saw it.
Am I not allowed to be comfortable?
Go wash my car. So what happens is James K. Polk runs just to watch the awkwardness in the room elevate. You guys don't do well with these songs. So James K. Polk is running as the candidate. He's the guy. He's the dark horse candidate. The Democrats are all split up, but eventually he gets the nomination. Now, there's a couple things about this election that are randomly interesting, not super important. You remember all the details. So let me kind of give you the thing that is probably the saddest thing you're going to hear, like, ever in your life. Here it is. Polk's running, but also Henry Clay. And we all love Henry Clay.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought you guys were going to do like a southern thing, like, uh-huh. But you didn't do that. So he's running as the Whig Party, and the thing that's bad for Henry Clay is he makes some political mistakes during the campaign. And once again, this is not super important you remember for the AP test. It's more like, just kind of like, what if? Clay, when it comes to the issue of Texas, he doesn't really come up with a clear position about whether or not to annex it. He says he's against it. He says he's for it. And he kind of flip-flops on the issue because, one, if he's for it, who is he going to anger?
North.
And if he says he's,
Against it.
who's going to be mad? The South. Okay? Because you know North and South is up and down. So here's the problem. There's also these guys running the Liberty Party, which you'll learn about in Chapter 16. The Liberty Party was an abolitionist party. The whole purpose of the party was to end slavery. The problem is the Liberty Party kind of takes some votes away from the Whig Party. So that's not good when you're splitting votes. The big problem, though, and this is more random trivia versus APUSH essential knowledge, Clay picks a guy to be his running mate who has a name that I could never pronounce, so I'll do my best. Thank you. You don't need to know this guy's name, but I do want you to know that that guy was an advocate of temperance. And as a result of his advocacy for temperance, who is he going to anger that is very important for votes? The Irish. So what happens is, and this is the sad thing for our buddy Henry Clay, the election takes place in 1844. Polk wins. Clay Polk, once again, is a loser. He loses, I think this is his third election for presidency. He's out. Polk wins. Now here's the random fun fact, sad fact of the day. Because Clay lost votes, partly because of his running mate, if 6,000 people, where a lot of the Irish were, if 6,000 people would have voted for Clay instead of Polk, Clay would have gotten the state of New York. Remember the Electoral College. If you look at the popular vote, it's pretty close. But it's all about the electoral. So if you take New York's votes and you put them in Clay's column and you take them out of Polk's, Henry Clay would have been president in 1844. So close. And guess what? He'll never be president of the United States. Now Polk does win. Polk's the guy. Now who the hell is Polk? Polk is one of the most fascinating guys in American history. How many of you know stuff about James K. Polk already? Before you read the chapter. Did you remember him from 8th grade? Polk? Polk? None of you? A couple of you are suddenly now getting knowledge. Yes. Interesting guy. He had a couple goals. One, not a very exciting one, lower the tariff. He's a Democrat. He's not a big fan of tariffs. His goal, lower the tariff. His other goal is what he's most known for. And his other goal was expansion.
Not only are we going to New Hampshire, we're going to South Carolina, and Oklahoma, and Arizona, and North Dakota, and New Mexico. We're going to California, and Texas, and New York. We're going to South Dakota, and Oregon, and Washington, and Michigan. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House. Yeah!
His goal was expansion. In fact, during the campaign, he talked about expansion. In fact, he targeted a couple areas. One of them is a place called Oregon. Oregon, during the campaign, one of the slogans of the campaign was 5440 or fight. 5440 or fight basically meant we want that as the boundary between the U.S. and England, Canada, and if we don't get it, we are going to fight England. So Polk was talking about expansion. He was talking about expanding into Oregon and other territory, talked about lowering the tariff. And guess what? Polk is going to do all those things. He's going to serve 4 years, and he's going to walk away and not run for re-election. But there's going to be controversy with his presidency. Now, a couple things you need to know about this time period. It's not about Polk only, James K. Polk. There was this idea amongst a lot of Americans called manifest destiny. And manifest destiny was this idea that it was America's destiny to spread from coast to coast. That God wanted us because it is our destiny. It is our destiny to possess the whole continent. In fact, the guy who came up with this concept, or first coined that concept of manifest destiny, was a guy by the name of John O'Sullivan. And John O'Sullivan, in 1845, a newspaper editor, he wrote this column, and it said, the right of our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent, which Providence, God, has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty. The whole idea of manifest destiny was this idea that it was America's duty to spread from coast to coast. That idea,
and as far as I can see, you were always meant to be my destiny.
that idea can be seen not only in speeches and literature of the time, but also in art. This is a famous painting in American history called American Progress. It's by John Gast. The painting is in the Autry Western Heritage Museum, which is over there in, what is it called? Griffith Park, LA Zoo area. And if you take a look at this painting, it really shows you what manifest destiny meant to these people who supported it. This idea that we are going to spread across the continent. This idea that not only are we expanding, because we've always expanded, but we are also taking a look, we are bringing Christianity. We are bringing religion. We are bringing civilization. You'll notice she is laying down the telegraph lines. The railroad is coming. The farmers are developing the land. And manifest destiny also meant that the people that were there were not meant to be there, or that they were backward and we must civilize them, develop them, and God wanted it to be that way. So manifest destiny, you can see that over and over again. This is another painting that's in the Western Heritage Museum. You can see the train coming in with the light, bringing the light to the darkness. All the symbolism, the farmer off in the distance. Now here's something that's not in the PowerPoint, but I'm going to tell you that they're going to try to trick you, and let me make sure you don't get tricked. Manifest destiny was not a southern or northern idea. It was an idea in the 1830s and the 1840s and the 1850s that many people believed in. However, this is the part where it gets tricky. By the 1850s, many Northerners, especially Whigs, become suspicious of manifest destiny. They become suspicious of expansion in territory because they're worried that the expansion is nothing more than a plot to expand slavery. So the idea of manifest destiny is not a political idea. It's not like a Democratic idea or a Whig idea. But what happens is, as the U.S. expands, there's going to be people who are against it because they're worried about the extension of slavery. There you go. So just know that. But in 1840s, this idea of expansion was not about slavery on its own. The problem is later on it will become that. So, is there any questions? Anyone confused on that? Because we're going to actually get some real examples now. So where does this actually take place? Where does expansion take place? Where is this idea of manifest destiny coming up? And if you remember from the 1840, you know the movie, right? Dude, where's my car? Now, according to period 2, this means colleague. Is that colleague? How do you say dude in Spanish? Vato?
Yeah.
What's up, vato? What's up, colega? Is it college? No. Is that colegio or something? Colegio? Colegio. ¿Es donde vamos a
It's C4.
I say dude in German. You don't have dude, huh? How about Bulgarian? You have dude?
Dude is American.
Dude. No? So, here's what happens. 5440 or fight, Oregon.
And I'm gonna hit that Oregon Trail, it's coming fall. I'm gonna hit that Oregon Trail, it's coming fall. Hit that Oregon Trail, it's coming fall. Heard the good rain falls aplenty and the crops and orchards grow. I'm gonna hit that Oregon Trail, it's coming fall.
Oregon becomes one of the areas that Polk focuses his attention. And as I mentioned before, it was a major issue in the election of 1844. In fact, the slogan was 5440 or fight. Now I want to go back in time for a moment to give you a little background on this whole Oregon thing. You may have forgotten about Oregon, but Oregon basically was jointly occupied since 1818. Remember, that was agreed upon. They said, hey, we're going to take this territory 10 years. The United States and England, we're going to jointly occupy this territory. We're going to share it. Everything's going to be good. And sometime in the 1820s, they expanded that agreement indefinitely. Now here's what's happening. A lot of settlers were coming into Oregon territory along this trail, the Oregon Trail, one of those overland trails. A lot of people are coming here. The first people to come here, question on the test, are the Methodist missionaries. Methodist missionaries are coming into Oregon, especially in the 1820s. And what do missionaries do? They're bringing God. You get a Bible. You get some Jesus. They're trying to find anybody at all to get their word out. Methodists. Methodist. Is. Is? Ist. Istanbul. So, here's what happens. As those people start coming in, you get new people coming in as well. People who are not necessarily Methodist missionaries, but they're people who are suddenly now interested in this territory. because they can make money or because they can, get land, whatever it is, people start coming over. Now, what you need to realize is England has a problem. Anyone want to take a wild guess what England's problem is with Oregon Territory? They're sharing it jointly. They each are sharing it with the United States. What's England's problem going to be in this little agreement? Anybody? Let me give you a little hint. Think geography. Yes, sir.
It's on the other side of the world.
I hate that word.
England, as a nation, is on the other side of the planet. Or they have to cross at least an entire ocean or an entire continent to get there.
Thus, the majority of the people in Oregon Territory are going to be of what nationality? American. Can you say American? Now, can you say it? American. You didn't say it. You didn't say it. I'm on protest. No. American. American. Okay, everyone. American. Thank you. There are more Americans there than anybody else. England, as Harley has accurately pointed out, is on the other side of the world or planet. So the other problem is there are a growing group of people in England who are thinking, do we really need this colony? There are people in England who are questioning England taking over territory in general. So Polk in 1844 is all like beating his chest, 54-40 or fight. England's like, you know what? It's impossible for us to really colonize this area anyways. We have our own internal things to deal with. We also have colonies in other parts of the world. Oregon's not top up on our list. So what happens is there's the threat of war, but England and the United States negotiate a treaty in which
And as far as I can see, you were always meant to be my destiny.
you could dedicate that to someone special. They'll fall in love with you. You are my destiny. Here's what happens. Oregon Treaty, real fancy name. I know it's going to be tough to remember that one. Oregon Treaty, Polk gets Oregon. No blood spilled. No war needed. Treaty is signed. They do make an agreement. It's at the 49th parallel. Basically the border that you all know and love today. Right here. Border. But you'll notice something right here. The line takes a little dip. And the reason for that is England wants to keep Vancouver Island. And there's good fishing, there's economic resources there, so England gets to keep that island. They also get navigation rights along the Columbia River. That was other part of the agreement. England could use the river, the Columbia River, and basically there's no need for any war. Polk gets this huge territory, and it's not just Oregon, it's what is today Washington and Oregon State. Beautiful thing. Polk's feeling good. England, may not be 100% happy, but such is life. Polk turns his attention to something else. He's looking over at Texas. Couple things about Texas that you may not remember from the other day. Technically, Mexico never acknowledged Texas independence. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, his friends just called him Santa, they said we were forced to sign this treaty and therefore it's not free. The other problem was this. There was a dispute about what the boundary was. Mexico claimed that the boundary between the United States and Texas, or rather Mexico and Texas, the boundary was at this river right here, the Nueces River. This would be the boundary. So Mexican territory goes all the way up to this river. Nueces means what?
That's-
It's called the Nuts River.
It's actually a fruit.
Huh?
Does it have penis fish?
It just I do not know if it has the fish. I don't know what that word is you said in front of it.
Penis fish?
So it's the Nuts River. Now, I will say there was a student in period 2 who made some hand gestures when talking about this river you may want to inquire about. Because I didn't quite understand what he meant. And he explained through hand gestures that will not be repeated in this room.
What?
Now, the United States of America, the United States in America, the United States of America said that the boundary between Texas and Mexico actually was this river, the Rio Grande, which basically means
Big river.
the Big River. So we got big nuts rivers. Grande Nueces River. So do you say river big?
No.
Then why is it-
Big
It's
river.
different. Like in Spanish, like we say white. You say White House. You say Casa Blanca. You say like the how do I put it? The adjective.
So when you read, you have to flip the words in your head?
Yeah. Well,
It's over here.
yes.
Interesting. Is that how it is in Bulgarian? Can they read there? Just messing with you. Just messing with you. We know they can. Sorry. Buy you a gram. So here's what happens. Polk Polk has to find out where he's going to, or what he's going to acquire next. But before we find out what Polk's going to acquire next, random game. Oh my God, where is he?
Right there.
Oh, you guys are good. You guys are good. Some of you don't know what Where's Waldo is. So you're looking for this geeky, hipster-looking kid. He's over here.
You're right there.
Okay? Some of you had childhoods where you had video games. You didn't have to play this crap. But anyways. Polk has to try to acquire some other territory, or he wants to. He doesn't have to. He chose it. And the territory that Polk also sets his sights on. So we got the Texas thing. So Texas is, doing its thing. He formally puts places a move to annex Texas. So Polk proceeds with that. So he's trying to annex Texas. At the same time, he decides he's going back to...
I'm going back to Cali. I'm going back to Cali. I'm going.
He wants to acquire California, New Mexico. In fact, Polk wants the whole dang enchilada. He wants it all. So Polk is proceeding. Give you a couple things I left out. On July 4th, 1845, what a patriotic day for that to occur. July 4th, 1845, Texas, all of this is suddenly now annexed by the United States. The Congress ratifies the treaty. They annex Texas. Mexico withdraws their diplomats from Washington, D.C. Mexico says, hey, wait, we don't agree that Texas is not part of Mexico. Mexico withdraws their diplomats, which basically is a big deal when you're talking about the relationship between nations. So Texas is annexed. Mexico says we don't recognize the annexation of Texas. Polk turns his attention to California and New Mexico. Did you follow that?
Wait, what was the date again?
July 4th, 1845. So here's what Polk decides to do. Well, little background here. There were actually a number of Americans living in California territory. There were a number of Americans who came across on the Santa Fe Trail, who came across on the California Trail, and they were living in basically Mexican land. Many of them had intermarried with local women. Many of them had bought land. So there were Americans in this region along those trails I mentioned. And when you look at it, there's a problem for the United States, or rather, there's a problem for Mexico, the same thing that happened in Texas. You got all these outsiders coming into places like California, and you also have Native Americans in the area, so there's a mix of people in this territory. Polk decides he's going to go ahead and do something. He's going to try to buy California from Mexico. So he sends a guy, he sends John Slidell to Mexico. And John Slidell offers to buy California for $25 million from Mexico. So John Slidell sent on behalf of the Polk administration to buy California from Mexico for $25 million. He goes there in November of 1845. Puts his hands on his hip, says, hey, 25 million, let's do this. Mexico responds with,
No.
money cannot buy love. Money cannot buy California. Take your gringo honky self back up to Washington, D.C., because the answer is no.
I don't care too much for money. Money can buy me love. Buy me love. Love. Buy me love.
John Slidell returns. Polk's not too happy. Situation's done, right? Oh, well, you win some, you lose some. Nope. Polk decides he's going to proceed. And this is the part, and this is what really irritates me about APUSH, that we don't have more time on this event. What I'm about to tell you is filled with controversy, filled with different interpretations depending upon who you ask. And I'm going to try to give you the most generic version of the events, and you could read between the lines and figure out what do you think actually happened. So Polk, at that point, remember Polk has annexed Texas, July 4th, 1845. Texas is part of the U.S. Mexico does not recognize it, but the U.S. does. There's a question, though, of this land right here in these stripes. It was disputed territory because, remember, Mexico said the boundary between these two places should be the Nueces, the Nuts River, and the United States says, and Texas says, the boundary should be the Rio Grande. So you have this area where Mexico and the U.S. are both claiming it. Now the part that becomes controversial is what happens next. Because James K. Polk sends in 4,000 American troops under the authority of Zachary Taylor, and those 4,000 American troops are sent into the disputed territory. Polk claims that those troops under the leadership of Zachary Taylor are there to monitor the situation, and while they are there in the disputed territory, they're attacked. They're attacked. Zachary Taylor responds.
American dream.
And the fighting that erupts is ultimately started in April of 1846. The fighting that erupts officially marks the beginning of a very important war, the Mexican-American War. Zachary Taylor and his men they claim to be attacked. There are a number of Americans killed or wounded, and in May 1846, the next month, war is declared by Congress, and Polk suddenly now has war on his hands. Now, the reason why this event is controversial is depending upon which perspective you look from. On one end, it looks like James K. Polk and the American soldiers were innocently attacked in disputed territory by an aggressive Mexican military and did nothing to provoke such war and were innocent victims in a dreadful act. On the other side, and probably the one closer to the truth, is James K. Polk was trying to provoke a conflict, sending troops into an area that he knew was disputed with the hopes that it would justify or lead to a incident which could be used to spark a war. You could decide which version you want to believe.
Do we need to?
Well, what does your book say?
Americans were innocent.
Yeah,
Says Americans were innocent?
Well, they say it was like planned for him. Kind of.
It also brings up the notion
injured and
that
killed.
Polk could have done it to provoke.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of plays the middle. And I present you both because it all depends very often on your whole, outlook on, this time period as to whether or not you believe that version A or version of B, or maybe even version C, D, or E. That's the beautiful thing about history. When you actually spend time studying it, you can look at all the things these people said, and they did, and you can come up with your own interpretation. Unfortunately, we don't have time here. What you do need to know is not everyone supported it. Introducing boys and girls in APUSH. For the first time ever in our class, that guy. A congressman from Illinois. A man who will one day become president of the United States. A man who will have a movie named after him. A man who will find himself shot while enjoying some theater with the wifey. A man who needs no introduction, but I will give him one. A man named Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln at the time was a congressman in Illinois, and when he found out about Polk's declaration of war, he actually introduces in Congress what he calls the Spot Resolution.
I'm coming for that #1 spot. All right.
And the Spot Resolution was basically Lincoln and Northern Whigs asking President Polk to prove that American blood was shed on American soil. So the Spot Resolution was basically the Northern Whigs saying, hey, why don't you show us where exactly this American blood was shed on American soil? Justify that this is true. And what you need to realize is the Mexican-American War is going to be a very controversial war, not just today, but also back then. Northern Whigs, including Abraham Lincoln, and actually some Northern Democrats, were worried that this war, remember what I told you about Manifest Destiny, that this war was not just simply let's acquire new territory so people could become farmers. This war was something else. This was a war that Southerners wanted to expand slavery, and this is the way they were trying to do it. And Lincoln was opposed to the war. And there were many people, especially Northern Whigs, question on the test, who were also against the war. In fact, there's a very famous guy, Henry David Thoreau, famously writes his essay on civil disobedience during the war when he is sent to jail for refusing to pay taxes to support the war that he felt was unjust. Henry David Thoreau is going to be an inspiration to later people such as Martin Luther King. This idea of nonviolent resistance. Well, the war happens anyways. The war is going to last approximately a little less than 2 years, from 1846 May till 1848. I'm going to give you a very brief rundown of the war, but I'm going to give you kind of the big idea here, and here it is. The war is horrible for Mexico. There's no way to put it except Mexico is going to get their culos kicked over and over again. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of battles during the war. You don't need to know many details except the theme of them. Mexico's going to lose most of them. After the incident that sparks the war, Zachary Taylor and his troops are down here in February of 1847, down here in Buena Vista. The fighting's going to take place. You had some battles over in San Gabriel near Los Angeles. You have some different things going on, all the way into what is today modern-day Mexico. Zachary Taylor has 4,000 to 5,000 American soldiers. 4,000 to 5,000. The Mexican army has 20,000. 20,000 versus 5,000. Zachary Taylor is leading those 5,000 men, and
American dream.
The Mexican army is crushed by Zachary Taylor and the 5,000 U.S. soldiers. They're crushed at the Battle of Buena Vista. In fact, Zachary Taylor becomes a national figure following the Battle of Buena Vista. He also gets a nickname. I'll let you look up why he has the nickname if you're interested, but his nickname was Old Rough and Ready. Does Zachary Taylor look like anybody that you've seen on campus?
Eric.
What's it be?
Is it Eric?
Eric?
Mr. Van Zandt.
Doesn't he?
Saying a little bit sentence. I do not look like
Oh my God.
I swear, he looks very similar to Mr. Van Zandt to me. Like, it's his historical doppelganger.
Did,
I've never told him, so don't tell him I've said it, but Glyza said it.
Taylor ever condescend
Yeah.
anyone?
Huh?
Did Zachary Taylor ever condescend anyone?
Are you implying something? I don't quite comprehend your
Van
statements.
Zandt's dick? That's what I'm saying.
Dude, this is YouTube. Oh my God, no. Eric.
Oh my god.
Silence. Now,
Far away, see.
it gets worse for Mexico. There's, like I said, a whole bunch of battles. In fact, even before the Mexican-American War begins, way up here, in June of 1845, so way before the war even begins, like 10 months before, a group of Americans, one of them you recognize possibly from the fact that he's named after a high school, John C. Fremont High. He and a group of Americans lead something called the Bear Flag Revolt. In June of 1845, they create a flag. Now the irony here, or the sad thing about their flag is the Bear Flag Republic, because basically they're declaring California an independent nation. In June of 1845, they're basically saying America, or California rather, is free. We are a nation. We are the California Bear Flag Republic. But the flag that they create, the bear looks more like a pig, as you can see right here. It's not exactly a stellar drawing, but hey, A for effort, right? They declare a revolt. It gets worse for Mexico because in September of 1847, another American general, General Winfield Scott, I'll tell you his nickname just because, Old Fuss and Feathers.
What do you say like that?
I don't know.
So creepy.
That's maybe the goal. General Winfield Scott enters Mexico City in September of 1847. He's all the way in the capital of Mexico, and he defeats the Mexican army. There is the image or the scene of the American army entering into the town center, the Zocalo in Mexico City. Anyone been to Mexico City? Mexico City? Mexico City? No one. A few years later after this battle, September of 1847, General Winfield Scott, Fuss and Feathers, another American hero entered Mexico City, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator.
Real American hero. Today we salute you.
I know, look at this lady, rude. There is the famous church that is in the center of Mexico City.
Real American hero.
There's my abuela.
Today we salute
Yeah.
you.
I did something while I was in Mexico. I said sorry for the Mexican-American War, and then while I was in the center of the city, as you can see, as I was there, I raised the American flag. Pretty awesome Photoshop skills, I know. Okay. So, Mexico City, for those of you that have family in Mexico, I highly recommend going to the capital. There's beautiful architecture and artwork. Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, a lot of people, some of the muralists, they did a lot of work. And there's a lot of monuments to the Mexican-American War. I'll show you a few. This is one of the monuments for the people who defended the country in Spanish. What? Patria? Patria? Your country? Patria. Right? The monument to the heroes. There was a famous story of these kids and these other individuals who defended Mexico. So there are all these statues. Now, I will say this, boys and girls, Mexico defeated me. There's very famous, right outside Mexico City, there's a very famous indigenous people's temples. Teotihuacan. And while I was there, I said, oh, no big deal, I can climb that. And then I nearly died climbing up the hill. It was horrible, yeah. I was like, I surrender!
We were like the first one to be sacrificed.
Yes. The war ends, boys and girls, in February of 1848 with the treaty that is, for many people, a controversial treaty, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the American negotiator, is this guy, Nicholas Trist. Nicholas Trist is the guy who negotiates the treaty, and the treaty is going to be forced upon Mexico by the American government and the negotiators. Here's what it does. 1. 2. 3. 4. Mexico has to give up Texas. Remember, they were still saying, we don't accept annexation. Well, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, they give up any claim to Texas. They also are forced to give up their territory in the Southwest, California, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, all that area that is today those states is handed over to the United States. Mexico is required to accept the Rio Grande, the big river, or River Big, as the border. And in exchange for all of this, the United States gives Mexico $15 million. To give you some idea about what this means for Mexico, let me show you the map. A lot of territory, some money exchange, the map. If you take a look at it, what Mexico is required to give up under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, if you include Texas, which technically, according to Texas, was free since 1836, but according to Mexico, was not. If you include all of this kind of slimy, duty color green, yellow, all of that is the equivalent of half of Mexico. Half of Mexico is taken from it. The territory increases the size of the United States by 1/3. Suddenly now America is bigger and Mexico is cut in half. There are some results I'd like to tell you. Cost some lives, cost some money. Interestingly, the number of Americans who died, 13,000. I don't have the number of Mexican soldiers and civilians who died. I should get that. But the number of Americans, 13,000. Most of those didn't even die because of bullets, because of the fighting. They died from disease and bad food. So, as far as wars go, not a huge number, but still loss of life and money. Important, extremely important. These new territories are going to open up a big old can of worms. These new territories are going to spark a debate about slavery and about the balance of power between North and South. Chapter 18 is just nothing but a hot mess. One crisis after another crisis. And it begins with the big debate about what to do with the territory acquired during the Mexican-American War. So we'll see what happens there. Mexican-American War is going to strain the relationship between the United States and Mexico for years to come. For many people in Mexico, this war was unjust. It was not even 100% popular in America. There are some other impacts. There's going to be two new Whig people, generals, Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott. Both of those guys are going to run as President of the United States candidates. They're going to become national figures because of their fighting during the war. Manifest Destiny is partially realized with this huge expansion of territory, this belief, this goal that we were designed to get from East Coast to West Coast. And one thing that I'm going to put out there is the issue of some historians have referred to the Mexican-American War as the first shots of the Civil War. And I want to read for you two quotes that are important for you to know. The first one is by John C. Calhoun, and he said, "Mexico is to us the forbidden fruit. The penalty of eating it would be to subject our institutions to political death." And there's this idea that Mexico, while enticing the territory that they had, was going to cause tension, sectionalism, if we acquire it. So for many people, the Civil War is going, or the Civil War, the opening shots of it, are partly during this Mexican-American War. A lot of the generals that are going to be in the Civil War, Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, they're going to fight during the Mexican-American War. So they're getting training during the war. And this land, they actually debated what to do about it before the war even was over. Last thing. This guy right here, David Wilmot, was a Northern Democrat. He's from Pennsylvania. He's a Northern Democrat, and before the war begins, he tried to get a proviso, a law passed in Congress called the Wilmot Proviso. And basically he said slavery should not be allowed. Should not be allowed in any territory. And if you read the quote, any territory acquired as a result of a war with Mexico through a treaty with the U.S., neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any part of said territory. The Wilmot Proviso was designed to try to stop a conflict before it could happen. Let's ban slavery in the new territory even before we get it. Northerners accept it, but it's defeated in the Senate by Southerners. The territory is acquired. We're going to start off chapter 18 with what to do with this territory. A couple of things that, if we had a lot more time, we would go into a lot more detail. For example, there were a lot of people who were of Mexican descent in California and Arizona and other parts of this territory. Technically, under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, their rights were supposed to be protected. Very often they were not. Their property was taken by white settlers who came in. Many of their rights were slowly kind of stripped from them. So there's a lot of controversy with regard to the treaty, the war, and everything surrounding it. But that basically is it for chapter 17.